We're joined today by Bart Pierce, an aviation attorney and aviation safety expert, to discuss the tragic idea of Flight 171 crash outside of Ahmedabad last Thursday. Mark, thanks for being here.
Yeah, sure.
Can you summarize what happened, Mark?
Sure. Yeah. The aircraft took off, looked like a normal takeoff. And when it should have been climbing out, you could tell from the videos, and there are many of them from the angles, that there was a loss of power. It started to sink, and you could see the pilots trying to raise the nose. As it just settled down, they couldn't get the climb.
What might have been happening in the cockpit during those final seconds when the plane was settling down?
We know the captain was calling a mayday call, so they were aware that there was a really bad problem. Small problems, small issues that pilots face all the time. They deal with them. They don't cry out mayday unless it's an emergency. So they knew almost as soon as the wheels were up that they had a really bad problem, and with only a few seconds to deal with it, they just didn't have enough time to figure out what the problem was, see if there was a way they could address it, make inputs, and then save the airplane. They just didn't have time to do that.
Let's talk for a second about teamwork between the crew on an aircraft, the pilot and the co-pilot. How important is communication and shared understanding during emergency situations?
Yeah, these pilots are both qualified and trained, and they're trained in crew resource management. In other words, it's not just one pilot that's flying the airplane. They both have independent responsibilities, but shared responsibilities. And of course, communication is key to that. In this situation, there was not much that they physically could have done to save the airplane if it was the aircraft itself that failed rather than a pilot mistake.
There's been a lot of speculation so far that we've seen on the internet, on social media sites. Some of it has centered around whether or not there was pilot error in deploying the flaps or retracting the gear. How do automation and system warnings affect pilot workload?
Well, there's a lot going on in the cockpit, but there are standard procedures from their first training flight as a student pilot until their last flight. Every pilot is trained on how to make a proper takeoff and the configuration changes that come about right after the takeoff. It's very routine. The two pilots are both well trained. It's standardized. And just from the outside looking at the video, you can tell because the wings were stable, the sort of mushing or the slow descent shows that the pilots were controlling the airplane as best they could with what they had. They just didn't have power.
And despite the automation that we find in modern aircraft, such as a 787, which is I think it's been around for about 10 years now, is human judgment still important?
Absolutely. The human judgment in this case that's going to come into question is how did this airplane get released to be represented to the pilots as being airworthy? The pilot in command of an aircraft is ultimately responsible for the safety of the aircraft and the operation of it. But the real world is that they have to depend on the manufacturer to manufacture a safe product, and for the maintenance people to know what they're doing to maintain it so that when you input the power input, that you get the power.
Mark, as we wait for the CVR and the FDR analysis, based on what we know, what would your message be to the aviation community or to the victims of this crash? Maybe first the aviation community and then the victims of the crash.
Yeah. Again, we've seen too many of these crashes, and the systems themselves failing the pilots. And of course, when the pilots are the victims themselves, the passengers are victims as well. So the message is, continue to focus on safety, hold the manufacturers, the repair people, the maintenance people accountable for doing their jobs. In this case, from what we can see, the pilots did their jobs the best they could with what they had. Somebody failed the pilot. And of course, they're also failing their customers, the passengers, and all of us.
As an aviation trial aware, as an aviation safety expert, a commercial rated pilot, a flight instructor, what can you bring in representing the families of victims who have died in this crash?
We have tried many cases to juries where, unfortunately, responsible parties refuse to be accountable, and you would hope that those who made mistakes, either in the creation of certain systems or the operation of them, would step up, admit their fault, and try to make it right by these people who've suffered and their families. But just so often we find finger pointing. The people that could have prevented this won't accept responsibility, and then people have to come to a lawyer to seek justice and to see if we can find out for them what happened, why, and how can we in the justice system help make flying safer in the future.
Thank you very much, Mark.